The alarms on the bridge of the Solace screamed before anyone had time to think. Daniel Hartley gripped the edge of his console as the ship rocked violently, throwing sparks from a shattered panel above him. Outside the viewport, space itself seemed to be tearing apart, streaked with the fire of a battle that did not belong to his people, in a war his people were never supposed to find. 3 days earlier, the Solace had been drifting quietly through a dead pocket of space, mapping debris fields left behind by some ancient catastrophe. Now it was caught between two fleets, locked in a war that had raged for longer than anyone aboard could imagine, a war fought by beings who did not know humans existed. Grace Whitmore, the ship's engineer, pulled herself along a handrail toward the command deck, her breath sharp and fast. "Daniel, we've got hull damage on Deck 4. If another one of those hits us, we won't have a ship left to worry about." Daniel did not answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the screen, watching two massive alien fleets exchange devastating fire in the black distance, oblivious to the small human vessel caught in their crossfire. The ships were unlike anything humanity had ever built, sleek and curved, moving with an eerie, coordinated grace that spoke of centuries of experience in conflict. "They're not even looking at us," Daniel said quietly. "We're nothing to them. A speck." On one of the alien warships, far larger than anything from Earth, an officer named Orvin Koss stood at his station, unaware that his sensors had just picked up something impossible. He frowned at the reading, certain it was a malfunction. The signal did not match anything in the Alliance's vast database. Not friend, not enemy, not debris. "Run it again," Orvin ordered the technician beside him. The technician's hands moved quickly across a glowing interface. "Same result, Commander. Unknown vessel. Small. Unarmed. Or nearly so. It matches no known configuration in the archive." Orvin's frown deepened. In his lifetime, and in the lifetimes of countless commanders before him, the galaxy had been mapped, catalogued, and fought over by the same handful of powerful civilizations. There was no room in that history for something unknown. Not anymore. "It could be Threll deception," said Leora Sen, his second in command, stepping closer to the display. Her voice carried the caution of someone who had survived many battles by trusting nothing at face value. "A decoy. A trick to draw our fire away from the main line." "Perhaps," Orvin said, though something about the reading unsettled him in a way he could not explain. The shape on the screen was too small, too fragile, to be a weapon of war. And yet it sat directly in the heart of the battle, drifting like it did not understand the danger it was in. Back on the Solace, Daniel finally found his voice again. "Grace, patch me through to engineering. I need full power to the deflectors, now." "They're already at full power," Grace shot back, sliding into the seat beside him. "We don't have the kind of systems these things are using." "We're a research vessel, not a warship." A young officer named Ethan Cole, barely out of training, stumbled onto the bridge holding a tablet with trembling hands. "Sir, I'm picking up dozens of vessels forming on both sides. This isn't a skirmish. This is a full battle, and we are sitting right in the middle of it." Daniel exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice for the sake of the crew. "Understood. We need to move. Now." But moving was not so simple. Every direction the Solace turned led deeper into the heart of the conflict, surrounded by fire and impossible speed on all sides. The crew had trained for many things during their years in deep space exploration, but nothing had prepared them for this. On the alien warship, Orvin watched as the strange vessel attempted an evasive maneuver, narrowly avoiding a stray blast that would have destroyed it instantly. Something in the way it moved caught his attention, a kind of desperate, improvised skill that did not match the panic of civilians, nor the precision of trained warriors from any known race. "Whatever it is," Orvin said slowly, "it is trying to survive." Leora studied the readout with narrowed eyes. "Survival instinct alone does not make it worth our attention, Commander. We have a battle to win." "And if it is more than instinct?" Orvin asked. "If it is intelligence, strategy, adaptation? We have fought the Threll for 300 years, Leora. We know every trick in their arsenal. This is something else." The battle raged on, indifferent to the questions forming in Orvin's mind. Explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum, and the Solace shook again, this time nearly throwing Grace from her seat. A warning light flared red across the console. "We just lost auxiliary power," Grace called out. "If we take one more hit like that, we lose life support." Daniel's jaw tightened. He thought of the crew below decks, of the families waiting back on Earth, who had no idea their loved ones had stumbled into a war between civilizations older than human history itself. He thought of every story ever told about first contact, and how none of them had imagined it would look like this, desperate and chaotic, with humanity as nothing more than an accidental bystander in someone else's fight. "Ethan, get me a clear read on which direction has the least amount of fire," Daniel said. "We're not winning a battle today. We're just trying to live through one." Ethan nodded quickly, fingers flying across his console, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air of the bridge. "There's a gap forming to the south flank, but it's closing fast. If we go now, we might make it." "Do it," Daniel ordered. The Solace lurched forward, weaving between wreckage and weapon fire with a kind of desperate improvisation that no alien commander watching would have called elegant, but which kept the small ship alive, moment by impossible moment. On the warship, Orvin watched the maneuver with something close to admiration, though he would not have called it that aloud. "It is threading a path through the entire southern engagement zone," he murmured. "No standard tactic explains this." Leora finally leaned closer to the screen, her skepticism giving way, however slightly, to curiosity. "You think this vessel belongs to a new civilization, one we have never encountered. I think," Orvin said carefully, "that we may be looking at something the old text spoke of, long before either of us were born. A race dismissed as legend by every scholar in the Alliance." Leora's eyes widened slightly, though her voice remained steady. "The lost race. The one from the ancient tales." "They were never lost," Orvin said, watching the small vessel vanish momentarily behind a wall of debris, only to reappear seconds later, still moving, still alive. "They were simply never found. Until now." The bridge fell silent for a long moment, as the weight of that realization settled over the crew. For generations, the story of humanity had been treated as nothing more than folklore, a fading myth, told to explain gaps in ancient star charts, and forgotten signals from the edges of known space. No serious officer in the Alliance believed the myth was real, and yet here it was, fighting for its life, in the middle of a war it had never chosen to join. Meanwhile, aboard the Solace, Daniel had no idea that his ship's desperate escape was being watched with such intense interest. All he knew was that every second they survived felt like a small miracle, and that the fire around them showed no sign of slowing. "Daniel," Grace said suddenly, her voice tight, "I'm reading a smaller vessel breaking away from the larger fleet. It's changing course. I think it's coming toward us." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Weapons status?" "Charged, but I don't know if it's hostile," Grace replied. "It's not firing. It's just approaching." Ethan looked up from his console, his young face pale. "Sir, what do we do?" Daniel stared at the screen, watching the alien vessel draw closer, sleek and impossibly advanced compared to their own ship, yet moving with a kind of careful restraint that suggested something other than an attack. He thought of every possible outcome, every risk, and weighed them all in the span of a few racing heartbeats. "We hold our position," Daniel said finally. "We don't fire first. If this is first contact, we are not going to be the ones who start a war we can't win." Grace nodded, though her hands hovered near the weapons controls, ready for the worst. Ethan swallowed hard and kept his eyes locked on the screen, watching the approaching ship grow larger with every passing second. On the alien vessel, Orvin stood at the front of his own small scout craft, having taken personal command of the approach, against Leora's cautious advice. He watched the human vessel hold its position, weapons powered but silent, and felt a strange sense of history unfolding before him. "They are not firing," he said quietly to the pilot beside him. "Despite everything, they are choosing to wait." "Or they are too damaged to fight," the pilot offered. "Perhaps," Orvin admitted, "or perhaps they understand something about restraint that even we have forgotten after 300 years of endless war." As the two vessels closed the distance between them, the battle still raging in the background, like a storm neither side could fully escape, something unprecedented began to take shape. A civilization believed to be nothing more than myth was about to prove, in the middle of chaos and fire, that it was very real indeed. And for the first time in centuries, the ancient war between the Alliance and the Threll was about to gain a variable that no one, on either side, had ever accounted for. Daniel watched the alien scout ship slow to a stop just beyond the Solace's damaged hull, running lights shifting to a steady neutral pattern that felt, against all logic, like an attempt at communication. He glanced at Grace, then at Ethan, both of them waiting for his decision with the same mixture of fear and disbelief that gripped his own chest. "Open a channel," Daniel said at last. "Let's find out exactly what kind of myth we've just become." The battle continued to rage in the distance, but for the crew of the Solace, and for the officer named Orvin Koss watching from the other ship, the true story was only just beginning. The channel crackled to life with a burst of static, before settling into something almost intelligible, a strange mixture of tones and rhythms that Daniel's translation software struggled to interpret. On the screen, an image resolved slowly, showing the face of Orvin Koss, sharp-featured and calm, studying the human on the other end of the connection with open curiosity. "You are not what our records describe," Orvin said, his words rendered into rough but understandable English by systems working furiously behind the scenes. "You are not myth. You are not legend. You are simply here." Daniel forced his voice to remain steady, though his heart pounded against his ribs. "My name is Daniel Hartley. We are explorers, not soldiers. We did not mean to enter your conflict." "Few do," Orvin replied. "Yet here you stand, in the middle of it, having survived longer than most trained pilots of my own fleet would have in your position." Grace leaned toward the microphone, unable to stay silent. "We need help. Our ship is damaged, and we have no way to defend ourselves against warships built for a war we know nothing about." Orvin studied her for a long moment, then turned briefly to speak with someone off-screen, before facing the humans again. "I am authorized to escort your vessel to a safe distance from the engagement zone. Beyond that, decisions will not be mine alone to make." Daniel exchanged a glance with his crew, weighing the risk of trusting a stranger from an unknown civilization against the near certainty of destruction if they remained where they were. "We accept," he said finally. "Lead the way." The alien scout ship turned slowly, and the Solace followed at a careful distance, weaving through drifting wreckage and dimming explosions as the main battle gradually fell behind them. For the first time in hours, Daniel allowed himself to breathe, though the tension in his shoulders did not fully ease. They traveled in silence for a long while, human and alien crews watching each other cautiously across the gap between their ships, until at last they reached a quiet pocket of space far from the fighting, where a larger Alliance vessel waited, its hull marked with symbols none of the humans could read. "That is the Aaron Vel," Orvin explained through the channel, "a command ship of the Alliance. Its leaders will wish to speak with you directly." Ethan's voice trembled slightly as he spoke for the first time in many minutes. "Sir, should we be worried?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "We should be careful, but right now, careful is the only option we have." The Solace was guided into a docking bay far larger than anything the small human ship required, dwarfed by the scale of the Alliance vessel surrounding it. When the airlock finally cycled open, Daniel stepped forward first, flanked by Grace and Ethan, his hands raised in a gesture he hoped would translate as peaceful across any language barrier. Waiting on the other side stood a delegation of Alliance officers, led by a tall figure with pale, luminous eyes, and an expression that mixed authority with unmistakable astonishment. This was Commander Celis Varen, one of the Alliance's most respected military leaders, a veteran of countless campaigns against the Threll. "So the old stories were true," Celis said, studying the three humans with an intensity that made Grace shift uncomfortably beside Daniel. "A race believed extinguished by time, or invented entirely by tired scholars searching for meaning in old ruins. We're not from any story you know," Daniel said carefully. "We come from a world called Earth. We didn't know this war existed until 3 days ago." Celis exchanged a glance with Orvin, who gave a small, confirming nod. "And yet here you are, having survived a battle that has claimed thousands of trained soldiers in a single day." We didn't survive because we're skilled in your kind of warfare, Daniel admitted. We survived because we had no other choice but to try. A murmur passed through the gathered officers, some skeptical, others clearly intrigued by the raw honesty in Daniel's voice. Celis studied him a moment longer, before gesturing for the humans to follow her deeper into the ship. Come, she said. There is much to discuss, and very little time to waste. The Threll will not pause their advance simply because we have found something unexpected, drifting in the wreckage of our war. As they walked through wide corridors filled with alien technology far beyond anything humanity had developed, Daniel noticed the way soldiers paused to stare, some with open suspicion, others with something closer to reluctant fascination. Word of their arrival was already spreading through the ship faster than any official announcement could manage. They were led into a large chamber, dominated by a holographic display showing the shape of the ongoing war. Dozens of star systems marked in shifting colors that represented territory won and lost over generations of conflict. Daniel felt a chill, looking at the sheer scale of it, a war far larger than anything humanity had ever fought. This is our reality, Celis said, gesturing to the display. For 300 years, the Alliance has fought the Threll for control of these systems. What began as a dispute over resources became something far darker, a war neither side seems capable of ending. Grace studied the map with growing unease. And you're losing. Celis did not deny it. The Threll have grown stronger in recent years, developing weapons and strategies that have pushed us back on every front. We are running out of options, and running out of time. Ethan finally found his voice, quiet but steady. Why are you telling us this? We're not part of your war. Because, Celis said, turning to face the humans directly, you may be the only variable left that neither side has already accounted for. The weight of her words settled heavily over the chamber. Daniel understood, with sudden clarity, exactly what was being suggested, and the danger it carried for his crew, his ship, and possibly his entire species. You want us to fight, Daniel said slowly. I want you to consider it, Celis corrected. No one here will force your hand. But if the Threll discover your existence before we do, they will not offer you the same courtesy of choice. Orvin stepped forward, his earlier caution replaced by something more thoughtful. The Threll believed themselves to be the most advanced civilization in this region of space. A new, unknown race appearing without warning would be seen as either a threat to be eliminated or a resource to be conquered. They rarely choose the peaceful option. Daniel looked at his crew, seeing the same fear and uncertainty reflected in their faces that he felt in his own chest. This was not a decision he could make alone. Not for all of humanity, standing in a room among strangers from a war he barely understood. I need to speak with my crew, Daniel said finally. Alone. Celis studied him for a long moment before nodding. You will have that time. But understand, Daniel Hartley, that time is the one resource none of us can afford to waste. The Alliance officers withdrew to the far side of the chamber, giving the humans a small measure of privacy, though Daniel had little doubt every word they spoke was still being monitored in some way. He turned to Grace and Ethan, keeping his voice low. This isn't a decision we can make for the entire human race, Grace said immediately, her voice tight with tension. We're 3 people on a research vessel, Daniel. We have no authority to drag Earth into a war between alien civilizations. I know, Daniel admitted, but if what they're saying is true, we may not have the luxury of staying out of it. If this Threll Empire is as dangerous as they claim, and they discover Earth on their own terms, we could be facing something far worse than a difficult choice. Ethan hesitated before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. What if we help them? And it's a trick. What if this whole thing is some kind of elaborate strategy to use us as leverage? Daniel considered the possibility carefully. Then we've already lost nothing we didn't already risk the moment we crossed into this system. But if it's real, if they're telling the truth about the Threll, then staying silent could cost us far more than we can imagine. Grace crossed her arms, her expression torn between fear and grim determination. So what do? Agree to fight a war we know nothing about, using technology we don't fully understand, against an enemy we've never seen? No, Daniel said firmly. Not yet. We ask for proof. We ask for time to understand exactly what we're being asked to join before we commit to anything. When Celis and her officers returned, Daniel relayed the crew's decision carefully, watching for any sign of deception or impatience in her expression. Instead, she seemed almost relieved by the caution in his voice. "A wise request," Celis said. "Foolish trust has cost the Alliance dearly in the past. Come, I will show you exactly what the Threll are capable of, and you can decide for yourselves whether this is a war worth entering." She led them to another chamber, smaller and dimly lit, where a series of recorded images and sensor logs played across the walls, showing the aftermath of Threll attacks on Alliance worlds. Entire settlements reduced to silence, defenses overwhelmed by superior firepower and merciless efficiency. Daniel watched in grim silence, feeling the weight of what he was witnessing settle deep into his chest. "These are not battles," Celis said quietly. "These are conquests. Every world the Threll take is stripped of everything valuable, and every population that resists is dealt with swiftly and without mercy." Grace turned away from the images, her jaw tight. "And you think Earth would be next, if they found us before you did?" "I believe," Celis said carefully, "that no civilization discovered by the Threll has ever remained free for long." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the ship around them. Daniel thought of Earth, of everyone he had ever known, living their lives unaware that a war of unimaginable scale was unfolding just beyond the edge of their understanding. He thought of the choice now sitting in his hands, one that felt far too large for 3 people standing in a room full of strangers. "If we agree to help," Daniel said slowly, "what exactly would that mean? What would you expect from us?" Celis considered the question carefully before answering. "For now, information, understanding of your capabilities, your technology, your people. In time, perhaps more, should the war demand it. But nothing will be asked of you without your knowledge and consent." Orvin, who had remained quiet during much of the exchange, finally spoke again. "I will not pretend this choice is simple, Daniel Hartley, but I have fought this war long enough to know that indecision often costs more than any single choice, right or wrong." Daniel looked at Grace, then at Ethan, searching their faces for some final measure of certainty that he knew, deep down, none of them truly possessed. This was not a decision made with confidence, but one made with the desperate hope that it was the right one. "We'll help," Daniel said finally, "but on our terms, and with full understanding of exactly what we're stepping into." Celis inclined her head slightly, something close to respect flickering across her expression. "Then let us begin, Daniel Hartley. The galaxy is about to learn that the old myths were never as harmless as they seemed." As the humans were led deeper into the heart of the Alliance command ship, none of them could have known just how quickly their small, cautious agreement would reshape the course of a war 300 years in the making, nor how soon they would be tested in ways far beyond anything they had yet imagined. News of humanity's arrival spread through the Alliance faster than anyone aboard the Arenvel could control, and within days, the quiet decision made in a small chamber became a matter of intense debate among the highest ranks of the Alliance Council. Daniel found himself standing before a much larger gathering than before, this time facing representatives from a dozen different alien worlds, each with their own opinions about what his presence truly meant. "An unproven species offering assistance in a war they do not understand," said a council member named Boris Fine, his tone laced with open skepticism. "This is not strategy. This is desperation dressed as opportunity." Celis stood firm beside Daniel, her voice steady despite the tension filling the chamber. "Desperation is exactly why we cannot afford to dismiss any possible advantage, Counselor. The Threll advance grows stronger with every passing month. We are losing worlds we have held for centuries. And you propose trusting our fate to a species that stumbled into this war by accident?" Barris shot back. "A single research vessel, poorly armed, with no understanding of galactic warfare?" Grace, standing just behind Daniel, felt her frustration rising, though she forced herself to remain silent, aware that any misstep here could undo the fragile trust they had only just begun to build. Orvin finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I have seen their ship maneuver through a live battlefield, evading fire that would have destroyed a trained pilot in half the time. Their instincts, however untrained by our standards, are not to be underestimated." The debate continued for what felt like hours, alliance leaders weighing the risks and potential benefits of involving an unknown species in a war that had already claimed so much. Daniel remained silent through much of it, understanding that his voice, as an outsider, carried little weight in a debate about the future of an entire alliance. Eventually, it was Celis who brought the discussion to its conclusion. "We do not need to trust them blindly," she said. "We need only give them the chance to prove themselves, under careful watch, with clear boundaries in place. If they fail us, or betray us, the consequences will be dealt with accordingly." Reluctantly, the council agreed, though the tension in the room remained thick even as the meeting was dismissed. Daniel let out a slow breath as the alien leaders filed out, some casting curious glances his way, others openly distrustful. "That went better than I expected," Ethan muttered once they were alone. "Barely," Grace replied, shaking her head. "We're one mistake away from being seen as more trouble than we're worth." Daniel said nothing, his mind already turning toward the challenges ahead. If humanity was going to earn any real trust within the Alliance, it would not come from words spoken in a council chamber, but from actions taken in the chaos of the war itself. Over the following weeks, the Solace crew was given limited access to Alliance technology and training facilities, allowing them to study unfamiliar weapons systems, navigation techniques, and combat strategies developed over centuries of warfare. Daniel spent long hours working alongside Alliance engineers, absorbing knowledge that felt both exhilarating and overwhelming in equal measure. Grace, meanwhile, found herself drawn into deep technical discussions with Alliance scientists eager to understand human engineering, surprised by the resourcefulness humanity had developed, despite lacking access to many of the advanced systems the Alliance took for granted. "You built all of this with such limited resources," one Alliance scientist remarked one afternoon, studying a schematic Grace had shared of Earth's early space exploration technology. "It is remarkably efficient, if somewhat unrefined." Grace allowed herself a small, proud smile. "We've always found ways to make do with what we have." Meanwhile, Ethan found himself paired with a young Alliance officer named Cale Doran, close to his own age, who approached the strange new alliance with an open curiosity that stood in stark contrast to the wary caution shown by many of the older officers. "You're not what I expected," Cale admitted one evening as the two young officers shared a quiet meal in the ship's mess hall. "The old stories describe your kind as either monstrous conquerors or fragile primitives. You're neither." Ethan laughed softly, some of the tension from the past weeks finally easing. "We're just people, trying to figure out a war we never asked to be part of. Perhaps that is exactly why the Alliance needs you," Cale said thoughtfully. "Everyone else here has been shaped entirely by this war. You still see it with fresh eyes." As the days passed, small bonds like these began to form between human and alien crew members, fragile threads of understanding, woven slowly amid the ever-present shadow of the ongoing conflict. Yet even as trust grew in small pockets throughout the ship, tension remained high among many of the Alliance's senior officers, unconvinced that humanity's presence was anything more than a temporary distraction from a war they were determined to fight and win on their own terms. That uneasy balance was shattered one evening, when alarms once again tore through the ship, signaling an incoming Threll assault far larger than any previous attack in recent months. Daniel rushed to the command deck alongside Celis and Orvin, watching in growing alarm as tactical displays filled with hostile signatures approaching from multiple directions. "They've broken through our outer defenses," Celis said grimly, studying the rapidly shifting battle map. "This is not a probing attack. This is a full assault on the Meridian line." Orvin's expression hardened. "If that line falls, the Threll will have a direct path to a dozen Alliance worlds, including several with significant civilian populations." Daniel felt his stomach tighten as the reality of the situation set in. This was no longer an abstract war discussed in council chambers. This was happening now, with real lives hanging in the balance. "What can we do?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the fear building inside him. Celis turned to him, her expression unreadable for a long moment, before she finally spoke. "The Council has approved a limited deployment of your vessel, alongside our forces, not as a primary combat unit, but to test the tactical advantages you may offer during actual engagement." Grace, who had joined them moments earlier, felt a chill run through her at the words. "You're sending us into the middle of a battle." I am giving you the chance to prove what you claimed capable of during our first encounter, Celis corrected. The choice remains yours to make, Daniel Hartley. No one will force you into this fight. Daniel thought of Earth, of everything he had learned about the Threll's ruthless conquests, and of the fragile trust his crew had worked so hard to build over the past weeks. He thought of Cale and Ethan's growing friendship, of Grace's quiet exchanges with Alliance engineers, and of the small, hopeful signs that humanity might yet find its place among the stars, not as myth, but as something real and valued. We'll go, Daniel said finally, his voice firm despite the fear coiling in his chest. But we do this on our terms, using our own strengths, not by trying to copy strategies we barely understand. Celis studied him carefully before giving a slow nod. Very well. I will ensure your vessel is integrated into the southern flank, alongside Commander Orvan's squadron. Trust will be earned today, Daniel Hartley, one way or another. As the Solace launched from the docking bay once again, this time flanked by Alliance warships rather than facing them in isolation, Daniel felt a strange mixture of fear and determination settle over him. Beside him, Grace worked tirelessly to calibrate their limited weapons systems, while Ethan monitored communications, relaying tactical information between the human vessel and the surrounding Alliance fleet. We're approaching the engagement zone, Ethan reported, his voice tight with tension. Threll forces outnumber us significantly on this flank. Daniel studied the tactical display, watching as dozens of Alliance ships moved into formation, alongside a scattering of smaller vessels, the Solace among them, absurdly small compared to the massive warships surrounding it. Orvan's squadron is signaling, Grace said. They want to know our formation preference. Daniel considered the question carefully, drawing on everything he had learned during the past weeks of study and observation. Unlike the Alliance's rigid, centuries-old combat doctrines, humanity had always excelled through adaptability and improvisation, finding creative solutions where brute strength alone could not prevail. Tell them we'll operate independently within their formation, Daniel decided. We're not built for direct confrontation, but we can create opportunities they might not expect. As the battle began in earnest, the Solace weaved through the chaotic engagement with a fluid, unpredictable grace that stood in sharp contrast to the more rigid formations of both the Alliance and Threll fleets. Daniel guided the ship through gaps in enemy fire that no Alliance pilot would have dared attempt, using speed and agility to disrupt Threll formations in ways that created unexpected openings for Orvan's squadron to exploit. Incredible, Orvan murmured over the comm channel, watching the human vessel dart between enemy lines with reckless yet remarkably effective precision. They are creating chaos exactly where the Threll least expected. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, though in truth it lasted only a fraction of that time, filled with desperate maneuvers, narrow escapes, and small but significant victories that began to shift the tide of the engagement. Grace worked tirelessly to keep the ship's systems functioning under the strain, while Ethan coordinated with Alliance forces, translating human tactical instincts into terms the Alliance could understand and utilize effectively. As the Threll forces began to retreat under the combined pressure of Alliance firepower and humanity's unpredictable tactics, a tense silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the slow, cautious assessment of losses and gains on both sides. Daniel allowed himself a brief moment of relief as the immediate danger passed, though the weight of everything that had just happened settled heavily over him. We held the line, Ethan said quietly, disbelief evident in his voice. For now, Grace added, though even she could not fully suppress the small, proud smile forming on her face. Celis's voice came through the comm channel moments later, her tone carrying a note of genuine respect that had been absent during their earlier encounters. Your actions today prevented significant losses along the Meridian line, Daniel Hartley. The Council will hear of this. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the exhaustion of the battle finally catching up with him. We didn't do it alone. This was a combined effort, Commander. Indeed, Celis replied. Perhaps that is precisely the lesson today has taught us all. As the Alliance fleet began regrouping, tending to the wounded and repairing damaged ships, word of humanity's decisive contribution to the battle spread quickly throughout the fleet, reaching even the most skeptical officers who had previously dismissed the small, unproven species as little more than a temporary curiosity. Daniel knew, even as relief washed over him, that this single battle was far from the end of the challenges ahead. If anything, it was only the beginning of a much longer and more difficult road, one that would test humanity's resolve and the fragile trust it had only just begun to earn among the stars. Yet for the first time since crossing into this unfamiliar war, Daniel allowed himself a small measure of hope, watching as Orvan's squadron formed a protective escort around the Solace during their return to the Arenvel, a silent gesture of respect that spoke louder than any words exchanged in the council chambers above. The myth of humanity, it seemed, was finally beginning to fade, replaced by something far more powerful and far more real. 3 weeks after the battle along the Meridian Line, the Solace was summoned once again to the Arenvel, though this time the mood aboard the Alliance flagship felt noticeably different. Officers who had once regarded Daniel and his crew with open suspicion now offered cautious nods of acknowledgement as they passed through the corridors, a small but meaningful shift that had not gone unnoticed. Celis met them personally at the docking bay, her expression carrying a seriousness that immediately put Daniel on edge. "The Council has called an emergency session," she said without preamble. "The Threll have shifted their strategy, and it changes everything." Daniel exchanged a wary glance with Grace and Ethan before following Celis deeper into the ship. "What kind of shift?" "They have begun targeting civilian settlements directly," Celis explained grimly, "rather than focusing solely on military installations. It appears they intend to break the Alliance's resolve through fear rather than continued attrition." Grace's expression hardened. "That's not warfare. That's terror. The Threll have always been willing to use whatever methods secure victory fastest," Orvan said, joining them as they walked. "Until now, direct civilian targeting was considered inefficient, given the resources required. Something has changed their calculations." As they entered the council chamber, Daniel immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere from their previous visit. Where skepticism and open hostility had once dominated the room, now there was only grim determination and an unmistakable willingness to listen. Councillor Barris Fine, who had been among humanity's harshest critics during the earlier debate, rose to address the room, his voice carrying none of the dismissive tone from before. "3 settlements have already fallen in the past week alone. Casualties are severe. If this pattern continues, we risk losing civilian morale entirely, which the Threll clearly understand would cripple our ability to sustain this war." Celis stepped forward, addressing the council directly. "We need every advantage available to us, including the unconventional tactics demonstrated by our human allies during the recent battle." Daniel felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes turning toward him, no longer filled with suspicion, but with a desperate hope he had not expected to see. "What exactly are you asking of us?" he asked carefully. Celis's expression grew serious. "We need your assistance in developing a rapid response strategy capable of intercepting Threll assault forces before they reach vulnerable settlements. Your ship's speed and unconventional approach to combat could prove invaluable in this role." Daniel considered the request carefully, aware of the enormous responsibility being placed upon his small crew. "We're not soldiers," he said finally. "But if lives are at stake, we won't turn away." Over the following days, Daniel and his crew worked tirelessly alongside Alliance strategists, developing new defensive tactics designed to counter the Threll's shifting approach to the war. Grace focused on adapting the Solace's limited weapons systems for rapid deployment, while Ethan worked closely with Kale and other Alliance officers to establish faster communication networks capable of providing early warning of incoming Threll assaults. Despite the mounting pressure, small moments of genuine connection continued to develop between human and Alliance crew members, offering brief respite from the constant tension of the ongoing war. Grace found herself increasingly respected among Alliance engineers for her resourceful problem-solving, often finding solutions to technical challenges that had stumped even the most experienced Alliance scientists. "You have a gift for making the most of limited resources," an Alliance engineer named Talia Voss remarked one evening, studying a modification Grace had made to the ship's shield systems. "It is a skill many of our own engineers have lost, having grown too accustomed to abundance." Grace smiled faintly, though exhaustion was evident in her eyes. "Necessity tends to breed creativity. We've had to make do with far less than what your people are used to." Meanwhile, the friendship between Ethan and Kale continued to deepen, offering both young officers a rare source of comfort amid the growing dangers surrounding them. "Do you ever regret staying?" Cale asked one quiet evening, as the two shared a rare moment of calm aboard the Aranvel. "Your people did not choose this war." Ethan considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "I think about it sometimes. But turning away now would mean abandoning people who need help, people we've come to care about. I don't think I could live with that choice." Cale nodded slowly, understanding evident in his expression. "Then perhaps that is exactly why your people belong here, myth or not." As preparations for the new defensive strategy neared completion, word arrived of another impending Threll assault, this time targeting a heavily populated Alliance settlement known as Verath Colony, home to nearly 2 million civilians. The scale of the threat sent a wave of urgency through the Alliance command, and Daniel knew immediately that this would be the true test of everything they had worked so hard to prepare. "This is larger than anything we've faced before," Celis said grimly, studying the tactical display showing the approaching Threll fleet. "If Verath falls, the psychological impact on the Alliance could be devastating." Daniel studied the display carefully, noting the sheer scale of the incoming force. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Orvin, standing beside him, nodded in solemn agreement. "Then let us ensure the Threll receive a welcome they do not expect." The defense of Verath Colony began hours later, as Alliance forces scrambled to intercept the massive Threll fleet before it could reach the vulnerable settlement. The Solace, now equipped with newly developed rapid deployment systems, led a small strike force tasked with disrupting the Threll's advance formation, buying crucial time for the main Alliance fleet to arrive. "They're adjusting their formation to compensate for our tactics," Grace reported, her voice tense as she monitored the unfolding battle. "They've learned from the Meridian engagement." Daniel gritted his teeth, adjusting his approach as the Solace weaved through increasingly coordinated Threll defenses. "Then we adapt again. Ethan, feed me updated positioning on their support vessels." Ethan's fingers flew across his console, relaying critical information as the battle intensified around them. Despite the growing danger, the crew worked with a practiced efficiency that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier, each member instinctively understanding their role within the chaos of combat. As the main Alliance fleet finally arrived, reinforcing the beleaguered defenders, the tide of the battle began to shift once again. Yet even as victory seemed within reach, a sudden and unexpected development threw the engagement into fresh chaos. A previously unseen Threll vessel, far larger and more heavily armed than anything encountered before, emerged from a concealed position near the colony's outer perimeter. "That's not standard Threll design," Orvin said sharply, studying the new threat with visible alarm. "This is something entirely new." Celis's voice cut through the comm channel, tense with urgency. "All forces, redirect focus to the new threat immediately. If that vessel reaches firing range of the colony, casualties will be catastrophic." Daniel felt his heart race as he guided the Solace toward the newly revealed threat, aware of the immense risk involved in confronting a vessel so far beyond anything they had previously encountered. "Grace, what are we looking at?" Grace's fingers moved rapidly across her console, analyzing the unfamiliar readings. "Massive power output, unknown weapon systems. Daniel, this thing could level half the colony in a single strike if it gets close enough." "Then we don't let it get close," Daniel said firmly, adjusting their course toward a daring, high-risk maneuver that would place the Solace directly between the massive Threll vessel and the vulnerable colony below. "Daniel, that's incredibly dangerous," Ethan warned, his voice tight with concern. "I know," Daniel replied, his focus unwavering. "But if we can disrupt its targeting systems long enough for the fleet to regroup, we might just save that colony." As the Solace approached the massive Threll vessel, weaving through defensive fire with practiced precision, Orvin's squadron moved swiftly to provide additional support, recognizing the critical importance of the human ship's daring gambit. Together, human and Alliance forces worked in unprecedented coordination, disrupting the Threll vessel's approach just long enough for the main fleet to concentrate overwhelming firepower against the newly revealed threat. The battle reached its climax in a chaotic exchange of fire and desperate maneuvers, until finally, against tremendous odds, the massive Threll vessel began to retreat, its systems critically damaged by the combined efforts of Alliance and human forces, working seamlessly together. A wave of relief swept through the battlefield, as the remaining Threll forces followed suit, abandoning their assault on Verath Colony entirely. "They're retreating," Ethan reported, disbelief evident in his exhausted voice. "We actually held them off." Grace allowed herself a shaky breath of relief, though the toll of the battle was evident in her weary expression. 2 million people are alive because we didn't back down. Celis's voice returned over the comm channel, carrying a warmth and respect that had been entirely absent during their first encounter weeks earlier. "Verath Colony owes its survival to the courage demonstrated here today, Daniel Hartley. The Council will not soon forget this." As the Alliance fleet began the slow process of regrouping and tending to the wounded, Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection, watching the colony below continue its daily life, unaware of just how close it had come to devastation. Beside him, Grace and Ethan shared a tired but genuine smile, the exhaustion of battle mixed with something far more meaningful, a sense of purpose neither had expected to find so far from home. Yet even as relief settled over the battlefield, Daniel could not shake a growing sense of unease. The Threll's development of an entirely new class of warship suggested a level of escalation that boded poorly for the future of the war, and for humanity's continued involvement within it. Whatever peace this victory offered would likely prove short-lived, and Daniel knew, deep down, that the true test of humanity's place among the stars had only just begun. The days following the defense of Verath Colony brought a strange, uneasy calm to the Alliance fleet, one that Daniel had learned by now never lasted very long. Reports continued to filter in of the Threll's new class of warship appearing in other sectors, striking with devastating precision before vanishing back into the darkness of contested space. The council chambers, once filled with skepticism toward humanity, now buzzed with an entirely different kind of urgency, one focused on understanding exactly what new threat the Alliance was facing. Daniel stood once again before the assembled council, though this time he did not stand alone at the edges of the room, treated as an outsider awaiting judgment. Celis stood beside him, along with Orvin, both now regarded as close allies rather than cautious sponsors of an unproven experiment. "The new Threll vessels have been identified in 3 additional engagements over the past week," Celis reported, her voice steady despite the gravity of the news. "Early analysis suggests this represents a fundamental shift in Threll's shipbuilding capabilities, developed rapidly enough to suggest outside influence." Counselor Barris Fine, who had transformed from humanity's fiercest critic into one of its more measured supporters, leaned forward with visible concern. "Outside influence? You believe the Threll have gained access to technology beyond their own development? It is the only explanation that accounts for such a dramatic leap in capability within such a short time frame," Orvin confirmed grimly. Daniel felt a chill settle over him as the implications of this revelation became clear. If the Threll had gained access to advanced technology from some unknown source, the already difficult war could soon become far more dangerous, not just for the Alliance, but potentially for Earth as well, should the Threll ever discover humanity's true origins. "We need to determine the source of this technology," Daniel said, stepping forward, despite the weight of dozens of alien eyes turning toward him. "If we don't understand what we're truly facing, we risk being caught completely unprepared." Celis nodded in agreement, "Which is precisely why I am proposing a joint reconnaissance mission, utilizing the Solace's unique capabilities, alongside a small team of Alliance specialists, to investigate reports of Threll activity near the outer boundary of contested space." The Council debated the proposal at length, weighing the significant risks against the critical importance of understanding the true scope of the threat they now faced. Eventually, after much discussion, the mission was approved, with Daniel's crew, alongside Orvin, and a small team of Alliance specialists, tasked with the dangerous reconnaissance operation. Preparations for the mission moved quickly, driven by the urgent need to gather intelligence before the Threll's new capabilities could be deployed on a wider scale. Grace worked tirelessly alongside Alliance engineers to enhance the Solace's stealth systems, while Ethan coordinated closely with Kale to establish secure communication protocols capable of withstanding potential Threll interference. "This is dangerous, even by our recent standards," Grace admitted quietly one evening, as she and Daniel reviewed final preparations for the mission. We'll be operating deep within contested territory, with minimal support if things go wrong. Daniel nodded, understanding the risks fully. I know, but if we don't find out what's really happening, we'll be fighting blind against a threat we don't understand. The mission began several days later, the Solace slipping quietly into the shadows of deep space, alongside a small Alliance vessel, carrying Orvin and his specialist team. Daniel guided their ship through treacherous, uncharted regions of contested space, relying on instincts honed through months of unconventional combat experience within the Alliance fleet. As they approached the outer boundary of Threll-controlled territory, sensors began picking up faint traces of unusual energy readings, unlike anything cataloged within the Alliance's extensive database. Orvin, monitoring the readings closely from the accompanying vessel, grew increasingly concerned as they ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory. These readings suggest advanced technology far beyond typical Threll capabilities, Orvin reported over a secure channel. We may be closer to answers than anticipated. Grace studied the sensor data intently, her brow furrowing with growing unease. Daniel, I'm reading a large structure ahead, heavily shielded. This could be some kind of research facility. Daniel guided the Solace carefully toward the mysterious structure, mindful of the immense risk involved in approaching such a heavily fortified location undetected. As they drew closer, the true scale of the facility became apparent. A massive complex hidden deep within an asteroid field, clearly designed to remain concealed from Alliance detection. This is far larger than we anticipated, Ethan whispered, studying the structure's impressive defenses. If this is where the Threll are developing their new technology, it's more advanced than anything we've previously encountered. Orvin's voice returned over the comm channel, tense with urgency. We need to gather as much intelligence as possible without triggering their defenses. If they realize we've discovered this location, the consequences could be severe. The reconnaissance team worked cautiously, gathering critical data on the facility's defenses and apparent purpose, while carefully avoiding detection by the numerous automated security systems patrolling the area. Grace's expertise in advanced technology proved invaluable, allowing the team to identify key vulnerabilities within the facility's shielding and communication systems. As the mission neared its conclusion, disaster nearly struck when an automated security drone detected the small Alliance vessel accompanying the Solace, triggering a swift and aggressive response from the facility's extensive defense network. Orvin's team scrambled to evade the sudden threat, while Daniel maneuvered the Solace to provide crucial support. We've been discovered, Orvin reported urgently, his voice tense with controlled alarm. Multiple drones converging on our position. Daniel reacted instantly, guiding the Solace into a daring maneuver designed to draw the drone's attention away from the vulnerable Alliance vessel. Grace, prepare countermeasures. Ethan, get Orvin's team a clear path back to open space. The following minutes unfolded in a chaotic blur of evasive maneuvers and narrow escapes, as the Solace skillfully drew the pursuing drones into a dangerous, winding chase through the asteroid field, buying precious time for Orvin's team to retreat safely. Despite the immense danger, Daniel's crew worked with practiced coordination, each member instinctively understanding their critical role in ensuring the mission's success. We're clear, Ethan finally reported, relief evident in his exhausted voice. Orvin's team has reached safe distance. Grace exhaled sharply, her hands trembling slightly from the intensity of the encounter. That was far too close. Daniel guided the Solace carefully away from the drone-infested asteroid field, rejoining Orvin's vessel at a safer distance. Did we get what we needed? Orvin's voice returned, filled with grim satisfaction despite the danger they had just faced. We did. The data collected should provide invaluable insight into the true source of the Threll's new capabilities. The reconnaissance team returned to the Arenvel several days later, immediately presenting their findings to the Alliance Council. As the collected data was carefully analyzed, a troubling picture began to emerge, confirming the Council's worst fears. The Threll had indeed gained access to advanced technology from an external source, one whose origins remained frustratingly unclear, but whose implications were undeniably severe. This changes everything, Celis said grimly, addressing the assembled council. If the Threll continue to receive support from this unknown source, the balance of power in this war could shift dramatically. Daniel stood quietly amid the tense discussion, aware of the enormous responsibility now resting upon the Alliance. and upon humanity's continued involvement within the conflict. Yet despite the daunting challenges ahead, he also felt something else entirely, a quiet, growing sense of purpose and belonging that had gradually replaced the fear and uncertainty of those early days. As the council debated their next steps, Celis turned to Daniel directly, her expression carrying genuine respect and gratitude. Humanity has proven itself far beyond what any of us initially believed possible, Daniel Hartley. Whatever challenges lie ahead, know that the Alliance considers your people true and valued allies. Daniel felt a quiet swell of pride at her words, though he understood clearly that the road ahead remained uncertain, filled with new dangers and unforeseen challenges. Yet standing among allies who had once regarded humanity as nothing more than myth, he felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that whatever trials awaited, humanity would face them not alone, but united with newfound friends across the stars. In the weeks that followed, word of humanity's courage and resourcefulness spread throughout Alliance territory, transforming the once dismissed legend into a respected and valued presence within the ongoing war. Grace found herself leading joint engineering projects between human and Alliance scientists, combining the best of both worlds' knowledge to develop technology neither side could have created alone. Ethan and Kale continued their close friendship, now openly regarded by other officers as a symbol of the growing bond between two very different peoples. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself increasingly consulted by Alliance strategists, his instincts for unconventional tactics now respected as a genuine asset rather than a curious novelty. He often thought back to those first chaotic hours drifting through a battle that was never meant to include his ship, marveling at how far he and his small crew had come since then. One evening, standing quietly on an observation deck overlooking the vast expanse of stars, Daniel was joined by Celis and Orvin, both seeking him out after a long day of preparations for the challenges still to come. "You once told me your people did not choose this war," Celis said, standing beside him as the stars stretched endlessly before them. "Do you regret the choice you made instead?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "No, we didn't choose this war, but we chose to stand with the people who needed us. I think that matters more than how we arrived here." Orvin nodded slowly, a rare, genuine warmth in his expression. "The old texts spoke of your people as myth, Daniel Hartley, a story told to explain what could not be understood. Now the Alliance will remember you differently, as the ones who arrived when we needed you most." As the Solace once again departed the Arenvel, this time escorted proudly by Orvin's squadron, rather than approached with cautious suspicion, Daniel allowed himself a final moment of quiet reflection, watching the vast expanse of stars stretching endlessly before them. Humanity's myth had finally given way to something far greater, a legacy of courage, resilience, and unity, forged amid the chaos of war. And as new dangers loomed on the horizon, promising challenges greater than any they had yet faced, Daniel understood clearly that humanity's true story among the stars was only just beginning.